Hi, my name is Paulie. I'm an author, and I love to share inspiring stories from my life and the lives of those around me. Earlier today, I was reflecting on an incident that happened a few years back where the Lord used me, much to my surprise, to help someone I didn't know and I had never met. And this story begins through a dream. One night I was asleep. It was the year 2009. I remember it was 27th of May. It was around 2 in the morning, 2:15 in the morning. And having been asleep, I woke up suddenly and found myself so alert. And I wondered what had woken me up. But then I remembered a friend of mine who was a more mature Christian had once told me, if you find yourself awake in the middle of the night, uh, just get up and pray because God could be trying to communicate something. So I got myself out of bed. I went to my prayer room and I prayed for a few minutes. I wasn't quite used to praying at that time of the night. I was just a newly converted believer. So after a few minutes, I went back to bed and I tried to sleep, but I just couldn't get back to sleep. Instead, I began to hear a buzzing in my ear, a very persistent buzzing. I also began to hear things so clearly, the things around me. I could hear the rain falling. I could hear in the bathroom the toilet filling, as the water gets into the cistern. I could hear that sound so clearly. I could hear the baby crying. At that time, I had a daughter who was 2 and a daughter who was 3, and one of them was crying, and I could hear it so clearly. And then I realized that God was trying to do something. God was trying to say something to me. Even though I was a new believer, it dawned on me that God was communicating. So I tried to stay awake. But much as I could, I began to fall asleep. And slowly, I went into a deep sleep. And God gave me a dream. In this dream, I found myself in my car on the back seat of the car and somebody was driving me and this car was moving so fast I could actually feel like my head was spinning, like I was in another world and my head was spinning in this car that was moving so fast. So the car moved and we began to get to a place that I couldn't quite recognize. And somehow in the dream, I understood that God was doing something. And so I began to take note of what I was seeing around me. Then the car came to a stop and I came out of the car. And by now, I had begun to take real attention to what was happening. And I felt in my spirit that I needed to go to a house that I could see. This house was at the end of a row of houses that was on my left, and it was the house at the end. And I knew I'm supposed to go to that house, and so I made my way there. I got into that house that was the last house on my left, and when I got in, I saw an elderly lady, and she was seated and she was with about 2 or 3 other people. But when I got in, one other lady who was seated with her stood up and she went to this elderly lady, helped her to stand, and then she pulled up her lasso. The lady was dressed in a lasso. I remember that was green and white, the elderly lady. And this younger lady who was with her lifted the hem of this lasso and she showed me the elderly lady's left foot. And in the dream, I understood that there was something wrong with that left foot. Now, they didn't say anything to me, but somehow I understood that there was something wrong, medically wrong with the lady's foot, and that what the Lord was saying to me is that I needed to come back here and help this lady. So in the dream, I went and slowly got back into my car. But then as the car drove off, I began now to look around and try to find out where I was, even asking people where I am, where is this place? But no one was speaking to me. And so I took note of some things. And one of the things that I noted in the dream was that this elderly lady's house was near a bus terminus. And in the dream, I realized that this bus terminus, if you remember in the olden days, when there was Kenya Bus Service, KBS, there were some buses that would go from one end of the city to the other. And I understood that this bus terminus was for bus number 4. And bus number 4 used to go from one end of this city to the other end. And so I used that while in the dream to try and remember where this place was. And as I exited the place in my car, the dream came to an end. So when I woke up, I was so surprised. This had never happened to me before. And I took time and I wrote down everything I had seen. I wrote about the house I had seen, the row of houses, that this house was the last one on my left. I wrote about the elderly lady. I wrote about the lady who had helped her up and the problem with her left leg. And so after I finished writing, of course, I went back to bed. And then when I woke up, I spent a bit of time reflecting on it. And then in the next day or so, I knew that the Lord was sending me back there, but I was so frightened. I was so scared. It had never happened to me before. And the other thing was, how do I tell people around me that I'm going to look for a lady who I don't know at a place I have never visited before, except in my dream, and that the Lord is telling me to help her? But after a few days, I gathered my courage and I sat my husband down and I told him, the Lord is saying, I need to help this lady. I need to find her. I have a vague idea of where she is and I need to go. And so, like me, he was just beginning to learn the ways of God and he understood and he told me, okay, you can go. So, what I did was that I found somebody to drive me there. And I sat down in the car exactly the way I had sat in the dream so that I could look for these landmarks, these places that I had seen in the dream. And on the first day, I went there. I tried to look for this bus terminus. I didn't find it, even though I was able to find the general area. I didn't quite find where I was going. So I drove back to the house and I went back to the dream and I studied it. And I said, let me try again. So after a few days, I gathered the courage, got into the car. I asked the same person to drive me there. And this time, I I was able to find the bus terminus that I had seen in the dream, the bus terminus for bus number 4. And so I got out of the car. I was so excited. And I began to look for this row of houses that I had seen. I wasn't able to find it, but I found a building that looked familiar that I had seen somehow in the dream. I got into this building and I went to a shop, the first shop that I saw. And in that shop was a lady. She welcomed me so well and we chatted for a while. I told her I'm looking for a lady. She's elderly. She's living with relatives, most likely. She wears some lassos and most likely she's a Muslim because in the dream, the way that the lady appeared in the lassos, it was the way an elderly Muslim lady might put on the lassos. And so this shop owner was kind enough. We chatted for a while. Then she invited me to her home. And her home happened to be in the same building, but on the second or third floor. So we went there and she even invited her neighbor and they sat me down and they asked me, okay, tell us again. So I told them, I'm looking for a lady. She's unwell. And this is how she looks. She's dark, she's short, and she wears some lassos. And so they were willing to help. And so they asked me, so what's this lady's name? And at that moment, I realized that the Lord had showed me where this lady lived. He had shown me how she looked like. He had showed me even the lady who was taking care of her, but he had not given me her name. And so I was forced to explain how I had come to know about this lady. And I said, you know what? I saw her in a dream. Let me tell you, these ladies had been so friendly, but immediately they were so hostile. They told me to get out. They told me, you are the people who come here and you just want to, do your own things, get out and we don't want to see you in this area. As I left and they shut the door behind me, I heard them saying, hawa ni hawa watu wanajifanya ni Wakristo lakini ni wezi. I was so shaken and I was so humiliated and so embarrassed. Nobody had ever called me a thief in my entire life. And so I got back into my car and I remember driving back to my house so miserably. And when I got into the house, I said to myself, you know what? I am going to fast for 3 days. And at the end of these days, I trust the Lord will give me this lady's name. And I'm not going to move. I'm not going to go back there again, even though the Lord has sent me on this assignment. until he gives me her name. And that's what I did. I decided to fast for 3 days. So, but I was so miserable. I decided, let me encourage myself with a cup of coffee. So I went into the kitchen, and I remember I poured in the coffee and I poured in the sugar. And as I was stirring the sugar into the coffee, and crying out to the Lord, and telling him, you need to give me this lady's name because I'm unable to find her. See how these people have kicked me out. See how they have embarrassed and humiliated me. You need to give me her name. You know, the Lord answered me immediately, which he had never done in my life. He had never answered a prayer so quickly. He gave me her name. He dropped her name into my spirit immediately. And allow me just to use the name Fatma. He just dropped the name Fatma into my spirit. And so I was so shocked, but I was pleasantly surprised. I was so pleasantly surprised. And I didn't break my fast. I continued to fast. This was Friday, and I continued until Sunday. And then, I began to get ready to go back and see her. So now, the following week, I called the same person and I told him we are going back. And this time, because I knew the area and I knew her name, I was able now to be more successful. As soon as I got there, I looked for someone and I asked them, do you know a lady called Fatma? She lives in a house that looks like this and like that. And the person took me actually just directly to where this row of houses was. And I remember I knocked on the gate, I opened, I walked in, and I looked for the last house on my left, exactly the way I had seen in my dream. I know there she was, seated outside her house in her lesos, just the same way I had seen her. And I was, happy, but I was also, a bit cautious and a bit anxious. What do I begin to tell this lady? But she welcomed me. She was a very friendly lady, and she was actually with a caretaker, the lady who was taking care of her, seated with her. And so I explained myself and I said my name. I said, I have been led here by a dream. I saw that you're unwell, and I've just come to meet you today. I know to my surprise, they actually showed me the same left leg that I had seen. And what was wrong with it was that there was a wound that had been there for a while that had refused to heal. They had been to the doctor several times, but that wound was not healing. But what was even more serious was that this lady, Fatma, had just suffered a stroke and it was taking long to heal. And I realized that is why the Lord had taken me there. So after we spoke for a while, I told them, look, I will come back. And if you allow me, I will keep visiting you. And, let's see what the Lord will have for us. And so I left. And, I was so excited. I got back home. But let me tell you, as soon as I got to my gate, I received a call, and it was her son. And he was so furious. He was so hostile. He was shouting. And, I kind of understood because, he was not in the home when I got there. And here is this lady, she has come, she has talked to his mother, and she's saying she has met him, she has known the mother through a dream. He was furious and he was threatening actually. And he told me, I'm going to take you to the police, never come back here. And he actually gave his phone to someone who was with him, who identified himself as a policeman. And he asked me, explain yourself, what were you doing with these people's home? I know I was shaken and I was frightened, but I had no alternative but to just say the truth, just to say what I knew. And I said, I saw this lady in a dream. I saw that she's unwell, and the Lord sent me there to help her. And this policeman listened, and he just gave me a warning and said, I don't want to hear that you have done anything to harm this family. And so they put off the phone, and now my joy turned to fear. And so when I got into the house, I prayed and I said, God, you took me there. Just if you want me to really help this family, open their hearts that they will allow me to go back. And he gave me some wisdom, and he just told me to call back and explain myself to this son of the elderly lady, of Fatma. And so that's what I did after a while. And when I thought he had calmed down a bit, I called back And I reintroduced myself and I shared the story again. And I said, if you'll allow me, I'll come back and I'll meet you personally and I'll explain again. And if you'll allow me, I will continue to walk this journey together with your mom. And he allowed me. To my surprise, he said, yes, you can come. And he gave me a day that I could go, which was the following Sunday. So at this time, my husband was not around. And so what I did was that I called my husband's cousin and I explained the situation. And I said, you need to take me back there because I'm too scared of going alone. And he agreed. So that Sunday, I took photos of myself, my husband, my children, and I packed them in a bag. I went and picked my husband's cousin and we drove to Fatma's house. And we found Fatma there waiting with her son. They welcomed us, although they were cautious. We could see they were still a bit suspicious. But we explained ourselves. I took out the photos. I said, "This is me. This is my husband. This is my children." We had 3 daughters at that time. These are my daughters. I told them my children's names. I told them my husband's name. I shared my name again. I said, "My husband is not around, but this is his cousin. This is his name." And I asked him to bring me here. After a while, I saw them beginning to relax and to calm down, and we spoke. And by the end of that visit, they actually allowed us to come back and visit another day. And from there, what happened was that the son and myself kept in touch. And every time that he would take his mother to hospital, he would send me a text and say, "I'm taking mom. This happened. She's not feeling well. She needs this kind of attention." And he would send me that text. And what I would do is I would pray because he never asked me for anything. He never asked me for any finances. He would just simply text me and tell me he's going to take her to hospital. And what I would do is that I would pray and ask God, okay, what do I do? And the Lord would actually place on my heart how much I needed to give. And that's what I would do. The Lord would tell me, give 2,000 or give 5,000 or 500 or 7,000. And that's exactly what I would do. And we walked this journey together with Fatma and her son. And my husband and I were able to help them for about 2 years until she came out of that illness or the effects of the stroke. When I wrote this story in one of my books, the verse that came to mind was Isaiah 49:16, which says, "See, I have written your name on the palm of my hands." Because what I learned from this was that God cares for us so much that He is willing to move someone from one end of the city to the other to go and help, even when these two people don't know each other. You know, uh, God brought us together with Fatma and her son, despite the fact that we were of different faiths, and we were able to share the love of God with this family and to share the goodness of God and to help even with resources, even though we didn't know each other, simply because God loves us so much and God cares for us so much. And that is a story I will never forget all the days of my life.